All right. Hello and welcome to Civic Saturday. Thank you for joining us for this very special first ever cross-country virtual gathering. I'm Janae Kane.
And I'm Eric Liu.
And we are the founders of Citizen University and Civic Saturday. Whether you are our neighbors watching from across the street, part of our 4-year now Civic Saturday gathering here in Seattle, watching from around the country where our Civic Saturday fellows lead gatherings of their own, or showing up for the first time, we're so glad that you're here.
We want to tell you just a little bit about Citizen University for those of you who are first timers. Citizen University's work is all about trying to build a culture of powerful, responsible citizenship all across the land. We are working to spread a belief that a strong democracy requires strong citizens, that we all have the power to make change happen and the responsibility to try. And our programs are all about teaching power and cultivating character. And one of those core programs is Civic Saturday, this gathering that is a civic analog to a faith gathering. It's not church or synagogue or mosque, but it has the arc and the flow and the feel of a faith gathering. And it's really centered on what we think of as American civic religion, the body of ideas and ideals and the creed that we profess to live up to as Americans and yet haven't fully lived up to yet. And so we gather together, whether in person usually or now for the first time virtually, to reckon with those ideas and to figure out how we're going to live like citizens.
So thank you for joining us. This is the first time we've ever done this, and we're just so glad that you're here. What are we about to do together? First, our friend and our former poet in residence, Na Akua, is going to lead us in a centering moment and a poem. Next, we're going to have an invitation for reflection that you can do online or with those that are in your household. That will be followed by a song from our friend and Civic Saturday fellow, Kate Tucker. Then we'll have a reading of Civic Scripture. Eric will give a sermon. We'll have more song and poetry, and then we'll wrap up with a parting prompt for you to participate in now and beyond this gathering. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Na Akua.
Morning, everyone. Today, I would like to take a moment to reconfirm and to confirm us with an affirmation. We are here. We are here. We are here now. I do not want to cry or yell or scream today. I do not want to ask why or how come. I do not want to say I don't know. I do not want to blame anyone. I do not want to blame past or present. I do not want to blame self. I want facts, something I can hold on to, something I won't question, something that won't question me. It can be illogical or logical, but it's there and I know it's there. And the emptiness can come and the call of want instead of give can ring, and the passive aggressive stew can dribble from lips, and the doors and windows may shut, and I will rotate this chaos on my axis, and I will be rooted. There will be no bend or sway, just me holding on to something.
Thank you, Na. That was wonderful. So now, what I'm going to ask you to do is to reflect on a question that we're going to pose, and you can either comment online in the chat or think about it and then talk about it later with folks that you are inside with right now. And that question is, how are you practicing civic character in these times? How are you practicing civic character in these times? And while we're thinking about that, I'm going to introduce Kate Tucker, who's going to lead us in a song.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. I am in Ohio right now, where I was born and raised, but I have spent a lot of my life in Seattle, so it's especially lovely to come together with Civic Saturday in Seattle. And the last time that I sang this song, I was at a Civic Saturday in Nashville. And so those are my three homes. And it's so special at this time of division to feel connected in some way, even if it's virtually. And so I want you to consider all the places that you've seen in this great wide country and where you were born and maybe where you are now. And if you're all alone and if you're sick, just know that we are here with you and this song goes out to you. And if you're able to sing, I would love for you to join us. People across the whole country are singing now together as soon as we start. The lyrics are posted on the Facebook event in the chat, and this is called This Land is Your Land. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I went walking that Ribbon Highway, I saw above me an endless skyway. I saw below me a golden valley. Yeah, this land was made for you and me. Well, I roamed and I rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding. She said, this land was made for you and me. When the sun came shining and I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving, and the dust clouds rolling, and the fog was lifting, and a voice was chanting. It said this land was made for you and me. There was a big high wall there that tried to stop me. A sign was painted, said private property, but on the other side, well, it didn't say nothing. Yeah, that side was made for you and me. In the squares of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, near the relief office, well, I see my people, and some are grumbling, and some are wondering if this land's still made for you and me. Well, nobody living can never stop me as I go walking that freedom highway. Nobody living can ever make me turn back, 'cause this land was made for you and me.
Kate, thank you so much. That's Kate Tucker, a wonderful musician from Nashville, Seattle, and Ohio, and also a graduate of the Civic Seminary program that we run here at Citizen University to train people from all around the United States to lead Civic Saturday gatherings in their own communities in a fellowship program. We're so glad, Kate, to have you with us. What comes next now at our Civic Saturdays is a reading of what we think of as Civic Scripture, texts drawn from our cultural and civic history that may be well known or maybe not so well known, but reflect and shed some light on the moment that we're living in right now and that precede the Civic Sermon. And so I'm going to let Janae read our text today.
Dorothy Day, excerpt from her memoir, From Union Square to Rome, published in 1938. What I remember most plainly about the earthquake was the human warmth and kindliness of everyone afterward. For days, refugees poured out of the burning San Francisco and camped in Idora Park and the racetrack in Oakland. People came in their night clothes. There were newborn babies. Mother and all of our neighbors were busy from morning to night cooking hot meals. They gave away every extra garment they possessed. They stripped themselves to the bone in giving, forgetful of the morrow. While the crisis lasted, people loved each other.
Once upon a time, a prosperous but divided nation was beset by a great pandemic. Fear became as contagious as the original virus, creating a second crisis. The economy had a heart attack. The government was paralyzed. And then what? We tell stories. We have so many narrative templates in our heads and hearts. And all these fables have morals. We tell and retell them, we work and worry them, because they reinforce our sense of rightness or victimhood or destiny or duty. We tote these tales with us as we live our lives. In fact, we live our lives by them, of them, for them. That's as true for the society as it is for the self. Some of these tales come from history or a version of history we have received. Some come from the atmosphere of the culture that surrounds us. Folk stories, mass entertainment, myths and legends. Through our stories and the metaphors we make of them, we interpret the present. So is this now the story of 1929 and the Great Depression? Or is it late 2008 and the onset of the Great Recession? Is it the 1918 flu? The 1957 flu? Is it 9/11? The answer, of course, is that it is none of these, though it echoes all of them. COVID-19 is its own terror, arriving in its own time. And the fables and morals from those prior episodes are of only limited use for sense-making. Indeed, they can blind us to the facts right in front of us. At internet speed, we are especially prone to forget a timeless truth, that even as we burrow like earthworms through the soil of old stories, we are producing new ones of our own. Today, I want to help us reflect on the stories we've started to tell about this crisis by unpacking 3 phrases that have become omnipresent since the virus blossomed. We're all in it together. Flatten the curve. And back to normal. Together, these phrases don't yet add up to a coherent fable, but each one contains an implicit moral question and moral choice. Let's start with the first phrase. We're all in it together. On the one hand, I love that this has become the mantra and tagline for so many American institutions over the last month, from banks and colleges to sports teams and phone companies. On the other hand, are we? I mean, are we really all in it together? The honest answer is not yet. As someone who lives in Seattle, whose wife, siblings, and nieces and nephews are in South Louisiana, whose childhood buddies are in the New York metro area, I have an acute awareness of the magnitude of this crisis. and acute irritation at how many people across our land, even in these communities, are not yet taking it fully seriously. Do I wish for the cataclysm to hit everywhere as hard as it's hit Seattle and New York and New Orleans? Hell no. Although that might boost solidarity, it would be bad for the people of the United States. If rural areas and heartland cities were to be as overwhelmed as King County or Queens, then maybe some of the red-blue divide would narrow. But it would be bad for the people of the United States. If cavalier young people were to die at rates like those of the elderly, then maybe intergenerational scorn would evaporate. If we were to take a utilitarian turn now and say, let the epidemic rage unchecked so it can sift out the unfit and allow the survivors to get on with it, then maybe, yes, economic recovery would begin sooner. But this would be bad for the people of the United States, not just for our material well-being, but for our spirit and civic cohesion. What we need is not for every community to suffer intensely. What we need is for every community to commit to joint defense. It's the Nato Principle brought home. An attack on one is an attack on all and necessitates a response from all. The United States, in modern times, thanks to accidents of geography and history, had never been under nationwide attack. That is, an attack that simultaneously hit the entirety of our continent and nation. But then came the 2016 Russian interference in our federal elections. And now comes coronavirus, both passing through the defenses of our oceans and our armies. We are under attack now, like it or not, feel it yet or not, and we need to come together. Now, if you don't like war metaphors, try the metaphor of a civic immune system. The body politic now has a systemic infection. We cannot amputate the infected parts. So we must unleash antibodies of shared responsibility and mutual aid. It's time to remember that in a crisis of contagion, we're all better off when we're all better off. That in a collapse of public health, the community is only as secure as its least healthy members. Implicit in the claim that we're all in it together is this moral question: how can I be useful? If you aren't asking yourself that question every day, I submit to you that you don't yet fully believe that we're all in this together. Last week, our team at Citizen University gathered up on Zoom the members of our youth collaboratory program, high school and now college students from across the land who are catalysts for civic action. That call was a pure injection of hope and can-do spirit. They are the antidote to the Gen Z kids still partying on Miami Beach for spring break, or that Tennessee millennial who became infamous for hoarding hand sanitizer to sell at an extortive profit. These kids, these youth, are translating COVID-19 information into the languages their immigrant parents and neighbors are speaking. They're setting up peer tutoring exchanges and sharing class notes for students falling behind. Not just their own schoolmates, but students they've never met from states across the country. They're delivering food to food banks. They're creating text-based peer mental health services. They're getting student governments to support classmates stranded by campus shutdowns. They're creating Google Doc mutual aid boards in the chat function of the Zoom call at the very moment that they're talking to each other and to me and my team. When the adults we work with in our civic seminary program, librarians and park rangers and teachers and poets and musicians like Kate Tucker, who we're training to lead Civic Saturday gatherings around the country, when these adults heard about these kids, they realized they needed to raise their game, as did I. And you know what? It feels good to be awed by young people. How can I be useful? The question in its fullest form is, how can I be useful to people who aren't already in my circle of affinity? I know too many people with skills, gifts, ideas, connections, capital of every kind, who have not yet answered or even asked that question. That's because they're still in the hoarding phase of their response to this crisis. They still believe that scarcity isn't a problem if it's not a problem for them. This is not because they are sociopaths. Most would like to call themselves good citizens, but they hoard because they do not yet realize that true self-interest is mutual interest. It is up to you to remind them by your example, by your words, by your invitation to join you in defense of all that we wish for: peace, security, dignity, safety, health. This brings me to the second chunk of story that's floating out there right now: flatten the curve. We've all heard this now a million times. We've all seen the iconic graphs. What I love about how widespread this phrase has become is that an entire society has embraced what my political scientist friend Scott Page calls model thinking. People are zooming past personal experience, the fear of illness and death, to look at things systematically. They are modeling different possible outcomes and seeing how individual choices and omissions roll up into institutional and society-wide consequences over time. In other words, we're getting a crash course now, not just in epidemiology and infectious disease. We're getting a crash course in civics and systems of power. And with this newfound insight and understanding, we need to not stop with the coronavirus. There are other curves, after all, that impact our ability to flatten this curve. Curves of income inequality and wealth concentration, curves of inequitable access to healthcare and healthy food, curves of incarceration, curves of pollution. While we're flattening this curve, how about we start flattening all of them? Let's take this ability now to see in systems and think in models and apply it to the other ways that health depends on a culture of inclusion, participation, dignity, agency, civic health. The moral question that comes with flattening the curve is not just whether I'll do my part to stand 6 feet away or stay at home. The deeper moral question is, how can I change at least one system of power around me now? You don't need to change everything at once, and you can't. But in this period of awakening, if you can realize that our system of education could be dramatically changed, our reliance on cars and commutes, our systems of imprisoning or employing people could be dramatically changed because the virus is now forcing such change, then just pick one such system and join with others, online or otherwise, to change it a little bit more. Map that system, learn it, understand it. Do your part now to reorder it. This is a time for solutions to what were seen only a minute ago as forever problems. Seattle, our hometown, has been mired in a crisis of homelessness. Then comes coronavirus, and bam, King County and Seattle are buying motels to shelter infected patients. So that's now an option. Medicare for all, a month ago, was a fantasy because where would you ever find trillions of dollars just lying around? Bam. Carbon emissions seem to be on an unstoppable trajectory to planetary upheaval. Bam. What if? Yes, after the emergency. But this twin crisis of pandemic and economic shock is without precedent. And it invites now civic imagination without precedent. That means not just more government, but also more citizenship. After the emergency? No. We already were in an emergency, undeclared, already in a disaster, unproclaimed. If you've ever read Hard Times, the great oral history of the Great Depression, compiled by Studs Terkel, you will hear two refrains. One, the common belief in the 1930s that an economic depression was like the weather, an act of God beyond man's control. The Depression showed folks that depressions were actually quite man-made. Just as the climate crisis now shows us today that extreme weather is quite man-made and can be unmade. The second refrain in Hard Times is that there were plenty of Americans then to whom the Great Depression didn't mean that much. They were Black, Mexican, Chinese. They'd been born into depression, assigned by color into the lowest caste. To them, the Great Depression only became official when it hit the white man. And after the New Deal and the war, they were not unhappy to leave behind the good old days. Which brings me to the final slice of story today. Getting back to normal. How many times a day do you say it? When things are back to normal, we can make plans for meetings, trips, projects, promises. But what if normal isn't good enough? Is in fact unjust? What if normal is silently soul-crushing? One of my favorite books is Rebecca Solnit's A Paradise Built in Hell, which tells of the way disasters like the 1906 San Francisco earthquake give rise to a surge of fellow feeling, mutual aid, sacrifice, and responsibility taking, a great civic awakening that participants yearn for later when things are, quote, back to normal. What's revealed in disaster, she believes, is not the exception, but the rule. It is our nature to be mutualistic, compassionate, and interdependent. Modern markets and the privatization of common life alienate us from that nature and that truth. But we can reclaim paradise because it is in all our hearts. Dorothy Day was a child during that 1906 quake. And the experience, as we heard in the text of Civic Scripture today, helped make her one of history's most devoted, radical, relentless practitioners of what we call civic love. Some of her principles were communist, some were Catholic, some were libertarian anarchist. She actually opposed the New Deal because she feared it would sap away that spontaneous, distributed sense of mutual aid and responsibility and civic love that made miracles of community regeneration possible. Her decades of activism for the dispossessed were all in search of the answer to one moral question. How can I sustain this spirit of love and make it the new norm? Start planning now for that new norm, a social norm of civic love. Make plans for this the way you've been taught already to make plans for stocking your pantry and separating sick people inside your dwelling, or preparing for an elder care emergency. Plan for the day after this epidemic is over, the day after the stock market reaches an all-time high. And consider, what will it take for me to sustain the joy of singing on balconies and banging pots on front porches, to teach yoga or drawing or otherwise share my gifts with total strangers online? What will it take to remember why paid sick leave for someone I don't know is actually good for me? To remember that circulating your power doesn't make you a sucker. To recall the purposeful joy of shared sacrifice. The answer begins with how we tell the story. Once upon a time, a prosperous but divided nation was beset by a great pandemic. Fear became as contagious as the actual virus, creating a second crisis. The economy had a heart attack. The government was paralyzed. And then, how do you want to end this story? Here's my way. And then, people began to turn on each other. They sensed that they had permission to stifle their better angels, to be bigots and hoarders, and to dismiss authority of any stripe. But just when it appeared that the pandemic would tear asunder this divided nation, a few stepped in to fill the void of moral courage. They were faith leaders reaching new flocks. They were neighbors meeting each other for the very first time. They were nurses and doctors fashioning their own drive-through testing centers. They were machinists who volunteered to make ventilators and quilters who volunteered to make masks. They were owners of empty restaurants who decided to use their kitchen to feed caregivers and delivery drivers and other frontline workers. They were warehouse workers organizing for safer working conditions. And their initiative shamed their elected leaders. Those leaders began to follow. They asked the people what they needed, and the people asked the government for truth, tools, loans, grants, know-how, and fair rules. And with those in hand, the people of this country tamed the virus, remade the economy to be more just, reinvented the democracy to be more inclusive, and broke the fevers of hyper-individualism and hyper-partisanship and hyper-inequality. The end, for now. Maybe you'd write a different ending. Maybe yours is a happy capitalist parable of how markets solved it all, or a happy socialist parable of how we all came to terms with a commanding state, or a happy libertarian parable about how we didn't need the state at all because self-organizing citizens were enough. That's fine. But the point is, none of us can get our preferred happy ending unless we start showing up more as neighbors and citizens and voters to imagine and animate a better future. These coming weeks and months will test us sorely. We are not ready. But remember, neither were the Americans who were weary of the First World War when influenza ravaged the planet in 1918. Neither were the ill-fed, ill-clothed, ill-housed third of a nation in the depths of the Depression when the Second World War came. No one is ever truly ready to hold together this shambolic, contradictory mess of a nation and all its beautiful broken promises. We hold it together anyway. Not every generation gets an FDR to spread calm and confidence and to steel us for the trials ahead. We find calm and steel anyway. When this is over, here's what I want to have learned: that we are all in it together. And so I've got to be useful. That we can flatten the curves that might shatter our union. And so I've got to change at least one system of power around me. And that the only normal worth having is a normal that everyone would want to return to. When we are asked years from now, what did you do during the pandemic? I want to be able to say, like many of those immortalized in hard times, I did all I could to save my country. I helped deliver it to a better normal. I was part of a great story. Hold on to this feeling you have right now. It is precious. It's the spirit of a democracy that's going to survive.
Thank you, Eric, for that civic sermon. And now it is time to once again hear a song from Kate Tucker and a poem from Na Akua.
Thank you, Eric. It feels so good to be connected to you all. And so I want to remind you that you're invited to sing along. There are going to be lyrics posted in the Facebook chat. And I'm going to sing a song that's very old, but has been reinterpreted recently. So we're going to sing America the Beautiful, which was written by Catherine Lee Bates in 1895. And then Buffy St. Marie did another version recently. And so now I am going to interpret this for you, and I'd like for you to sing with me. There were Choctaws in Alabama, Chippewas in St. Paul. Mississippi mud runs like a river in me. Oh, America, she's like a mother to me. Here we go. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea, from sea to shining sea. There were salmon running in Seattle, pyramids in Illinois, trade routes up and down the Mississippi River to see. Oh, America, she's like a mother to me. Oh, beautiful for vision clear to see beyond the years. The nighttime sky, our hopes that fly, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee will selfish gain no longer stain the land of the free, and crown thy good with brother and sisterhood from sea to shining sea.
We humans inhabit time and space. We humans inhabit time and space. Each breath in, married to the shorthand. Each breath out, married to the long. What do you long for? To be remembered? To leave a legacy? Each breath in marks a moment in history. Each breath out shifts our perspective of tomorrow. Can we borrow time and ask it to teach us not to taunt us about yesterday? Will yesterday leave a hint for us about the future? While the present continues to ask us, what do you long for?
Thank you, Kate. Thank you to everyone for joining us here today. It is very comforting to know that wherever you are, we are building a civic community together. We also want to thank our partners, Town Hall Seattle, our Civic Saturday fellows and partners around the country, and to our extraordinary team that is leading this effort behind the scenes, especially Tatum, Father, and Gil. We're going to let you know that the sermon that Eric delivered will be posted online, and we'll share links in all the usual places.
And what we want to close with here, actually, at our face-to-face gatherings, which we will resume when we can, we always close with what we call Civic Circles, where people form up into groups of 4 or 6 to reflect on what they've been hearing or provoked by earlier in the gathering, and to think about what they might do with the spirit that's been stirred in them. And what we want to do today is actually convert that moment into an invitation to what we're calling civic love notes. And we want to invite you actually to think about using the hashtag civic love note. Think about where you're finding joy right now, what it is that you love even in these dark and challenging times, about your place, about your community, however you define community. Share it in a story, in a video, in a post, in a text. You can share it with us even in the chat right now or on social media with the hashtag Civic Love Note. And we'll be gathering these up and resending them back out to folks as we harvest them. And over time, as Janae said, not only will the text of the sermon that I gave earlier be posted on our website and elsewhere, but the entirety of this gathering in recorded form will also be shareable. And we'll invite you to share that as well. But join us in this not only conversation, but reflection on what it means to spread civic life, to spread civic love in a time of coronavirus. Spread that joy and be with us and be with one another and be well in this time. Thank you for joining us for Civic Saturday.
Thank you for being here.